D-Day. The day often called the turning point of World War II. But did D-Day really change the course of the war? Or was it just a massive military operation that history has blown out of proportion? Picture thousands of soldiers from different countries, lined up on warships, staring at the beaches of Normandy filled with mines and enemy fire. They knew this wasn't just any battle. This was a moment that could decide the fate of the world. Yet behind all the bravery and sacrifice, there's a big question. How much did D-Day actually impact the final outcome of the war? Did the invasion truly open the door for the Allied victory? Or were there other factors that mattered more? In this video, we'll dive into the historical facts, explore the planning and execution of the largest sea and land operation ever. We'll break down the myths and realities often hidden behind the heroic stories. And of course, we'll invite you to think critically, because history isn't just about what happened, it's about how we understand it. So, are you ready to see D-Day from a different perspective? Let's start this journey together. And at the end of the video, I want to hear from you. Do you think D-Day was the right decision or the wrong one? Before we dive deeper, let's set the stage. World War II was raging across multiple continents. Europe was under the iron grip of Nazi Germany. The Soviet Union was locked in a brutal fight on the Eastern Front, and the Allies were desperate to open a new front in Western Europe. The idea was simple but daunting. Land thousands of troops on heavily fortified beaches and break through German defenses. This operation was codenamed Operation Overlord. Planning it took months of secret meetings, intelligence gathering, and massive coordination. The stakes couldn't have been higher. If the invasion failed, it could have prolonged the war by years. Or worse, it could have crushed the hopes of millions waiting for liberation. The Allies assembled an enormous force, over 156,000 soldiers from the United States, Britain, Canada, and other Allied nations. They were supported by thousands of ships, aircraft, and tanks. The scale was unprecedented. But the Germans were no pushovers. They had spent years fortifying the Atlantic Wall. Concrete bunkers, machine gun nests, mines, and artillery lined the coast. The defenders were battle-hardened and ready. On June 6, 1944, the world watched as the largest amphibious assault in history began. The beaches of Normandy became a deadly battleground. Soldiers faced relentless gunfire, rough seas, and chaos. Many never made it past the shoreline. Yet, despite the heavy losses, the Allies secured a foothold. This success marked the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. But was it really that simple? Some historians argue that the Soviet advances on the Eastern Front played a bigger role. Others point to the strategic bombing campaigns that weakened German industry, and some say D-Day was more symbolic, a morale booster rather than a decisive military victory. So, how do we separate fact from myth? How do we understand the true impact of D-Day? That's what we're here to explore. By looking at archival footage, official records, and expert analysis, we'll piece together the story. And along the way, we'll challenge some common assumptions. Because history is never black and white. It's messy, complicated, and often surprising. So buckle up. This is not just a history lesson. It's a journey into one of the most pivotal moments of the 20th century. And by the end, you might see D-Day in a whole new light. 1. Strategic background of D-Day. To understand why D-Day was such a monumental event, we need to look at the bigger picture of World War II in early 1944. By that time, Nazi Germany had occupied much of Western Europe. France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and other countries were under German control. The Soviet Union was locked in a brutal and costly battle against the Germans on the Eastern Front. Meanwhile, the United States and Britain were preparing to open a new front in Western Europe to relieve pressure on the Soviets and push the Nazis back. The idea was to launch a massive invasion across the English Channel into Nazi-occupied France. But this was easier said than done. The Germans had spent years fortifying the coastlines with bunkers, mines, and artillery. This defensive line was known as the Atlantic Wall. It stretched from Norway all the way down to the border of Spain. The Allies knew that a direct assault would be incredibly risky. Thousands of soldiers would have to land on heavily defended beaches, facing machine gun fire, artillery shells, and rough seas. The stakes were enormous. If the invasion failed, it could have prolonged the war by years and cost countless lives. But if it succeeded, it would open the door to liberating Western Europe and ultimately defeating Nazi Germany. Planning for the invasion began in earnest in 1943. It involved coordination between multiple Allied nations, including the United States, Britain, and Canada. Intelligence gathering was crucial. The Allies used spies, aerial reconnaissance, and even deception tactics to mislead the Germans about the invasion location. One famous example was Operation Fortitude, which aimed to convince the Germans that the invasion would happen at Pas de Calais, not Normandy. The scale of the operation was staggering. Over 3 million troops would eventually be involved in the campaign. On D-Day itself, more than 156,000 soldiers landed on 5 beaches: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. They were supported by thousands of ships, aircraft, and tanks. The goal was to establish a secure foothold on the continent and begin pushing inland. But the Germans were prepared. They had experienced commanders and well-trained troops defending the coast. The fighting was fierce and chaotic. Many soldiers faced near-impossible odds just to make it off the beaches. Despite the heavy casualties, the Allies managed to secure their objectives by the end of the day. This success was a turning point in the war. It forced Germany to fight a two-front war, stretching their resources thin. But was D-Day the single most important factor in the Allied victory? Some historians argue that the Soviet advances on the Eastern Front were more decisive. Others point to the sustained bombing campaigns that crippled German industry. And some suggest that D-Day's symbolic value was as important as its military impact. Understanding these different perspectives helps us appreciate the complexity of history. It reminds us that no single event happens in isolation. D-Day was a critical piece of a much larger puzzle. 2. Implementation of D-Day. On the morning of June 6, 1944, the world held its breath. The largest amphibious invasion in history was about to begin. At just before dawn, thousands of Allied paratroopers and glider troops were dropped behind enemy lines. Their mission was to secure key roads and bridges to prevent German reinforcements from reaching the beaches. Meanwhile, the Naval Armada, consisting of over 5,000 ships and landing craft, approached the Normandy coast. The soldiers aboard these vessels knew the risks. They were heading into a deadly gauntlet of mines, artillery, and machine gun fire. The 5 designated beaches, Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword, each presented unique challenges. Utah Beach, assigned to American forces, saw relatively lighter resistance, allowing troops to advance inland more quickly. Omaha Beach, however, was a nightmare. American soldiers faced brutal German defenses, rough seas, and confusion. Casualties were high, and many soldiers struggled to reach the shore. But their determination never wavered. British and Canadian forces landed on Gold, Juno, and Sword beaches. They encountered fierce resistance, but managed to push forward. The coordination between air, sea, and land forces was critical. Thousands of aircraft bombed German positions before and during the landings. Naval gunfire provided cover for the troops on the beaches. Despite all the planning, chaos was inevitable. Communication breakdowns, unexpected obstacles, and fierce German counterattacks made the battle unpredictable. Many soldiers showed extraordinary courage under fire. Medals of honor and other awards were given to those who risked everything to save their comrades and secure the beachheads. By the end of the day, the Allies had established a foothold in Normandy. They had secured key towns and linked the beachheads. But the cost was staggering. Thousands of soldiers were killed, wounded, or missing. The battle for Normandy would continue for weeks, with intense fighting inland. D-Day was just the beginning of a long and bloody campaign. Yet the success of the invasion was a crucial step toward liberating Western Europe. It demonstrated the power of Allied cooperation and planning, and it showed the resilience and bravery of the soldiers who faced unimaginable odds. But the question remains, was this massive effort the decisive moment that turned the tide of the war? Or was it one of many important battles in a complex conflict? As we continue, we'll explore the aftermath and the broader impact of D-Day on the course of World War II. 3. Immediate impact of D-Day. The immediate impact of D-Day was undeniable. By securing the beaches of Normandy, the Allies established a crucial foothold on the European continent. This foothold allowed them to bring in more troops, equipment, and supplies. It was the beginning of a massive push inland. The German forces, caught off guard by the scale and success of the invasion, scrambled to respond. But the damage was done. The invasion forced Germany to fight a two-front war. On one side, the Soviets were advancing from the east. On the other, the Western Allies were pushing in from the west. This stretched German resources and manpower thin. It also disrupted German supply lines and communication. The psychological impact on both sides was significant. For the Allies and occupied peoples, D-Day was a symbol of hope and liberation. It showed that the seemingly invincible Nazi war machine could be challenged. For the Germans, it was a shock and a blow to morale. The Atlantic Wall, once thought impregnable, had been breached. However, the battle for Normandy was far from over. The fighting inland was brutal and costly. The Allies faced fierce German counterattacks and difficult terrain. Cities and towns were destroyed, and thousands more lives were lost. But the momentum was with the Allies. Each victory brought them closer to Paris and the heart of Nazi Germany. D-Day also had strategic consequences beyond the battlefield. It accelerated the collapse of German defenses in Western Europe. It forced Hitler to divert troops from the Eastern Front, easing pressure on the Soviets. It allowed the Allies to establish airfields and supply bases closer to Germany. This increased the effectiveness of bombing campaigns and ground operations. Yet some historians argue that D-Day's impact has been overstated. They point out that the Soviet advances on the Eastern Front were already pushing Germany back. Others highlight the role of economic factors and internal German weaknesses. Still, most agree that D-Day was a critical turning point. It was a massive gamble that paid off. It demonstrated the power of Allied cooperation and planning, and it set the stage for the final defeat of Nazi Germany. Understanding the immediate impact of D-Day helps us appreciate the complexity of the war. It reminds us that victory was not guaranteed. It was earned through sacrifice, strategy, and sheer determination. As we move forward, we'll explore the controversies and debates surrounding D-Day's true significance. Because history is rarely simple, and the story of D-Day is no exception. 4. Controversy and debate surrounding D-Day. Despite the undeniable heroism and scale of D-Day, historians have long debated its true significance. Was it the decisive turning point of World War II, or just one of many important battles? Some argue that the Soviet Union's massive offensives on the Eastern Front played a more critical role in defeating Nazi Germany. By mid-1944, the Red Army was pushing deep into Eastern Europe, inflicting heavy losses on German forces. This relentless pressure forced Germany to divert troops and resources away from the West. Others emphasize the impact of the Allied strategic bombing campaign. For months, Allied bombers targeted German factories, transportation networks, and oil refineries. This weakened Germany's ability to produce weapons and fuel, crippling their war effort. Some historians suggest that D-Day's symbolic value was as important as its military success. The invasion boosted Allied morale and gave hope to occupied countries. It demonstrated that the Nazis could be beaten. But there are also criticisms. Some say the planning and execution of D-Day were flawed. The high casualty rates, especially at Omaha Beach, raise questions about whether the operation was worth the cost. Others point out that the success of D-Day depended heavily on factors outside the invasion itself. For example, the weather played a crucial role. The invasion was delayed by bad weather, and the chosen day was a narrow window of opportunity. Had the weather been worse, the operation might have failed. There's also debate about the role of deception operations like Operation Fortitude. Some argue that misleading the Germans about the invasion location was key to success. Others believe the Germans were already overstretched and demoralized, making the invasion's success inevitable. These debates highlight the complexity of history. No single event can be viewed in isolation. D-Day was a massive, risky gamble that paid off, but it was part of a larger, multifaceted war effort. Understanding these different perspectives helps us appreciate the many factors that shaped the outcome of World War II. It also reminds us that history is often messy and full of contradictions. So, what do you think? Was D-Day the decisive moment that changed everything? Or was it just one piece of a much bigger puzzle? Let's keep this conversation going, because the story of D-Day is far from over. Closing. As we wrap up this deep dive into D-Day, it's clear that this event was more than just a military operation. It was a symbol of courage, sacrifice, and the complex realities of war. The bravery of the soldiers who stormed those beaches is undeniable. Their actions helped change the course of history. But as we've seen, the story of D-Day is not black and white. It's filled with debates, controversies, and different perspectives. Understanding these nuances helps us appreciate the full picture. History is not just about dates and battles. It's about people, decisions, and the ripple effects that shape our world. So, what's your take? Was D-Day the decisive moment that turned the tide of World War II? Or was it one of many factors that contributed to the eventual Allied victory? Maybe it was both, or maybe something else entirely. The beauty of history is that it invites us to ask questions and explore. It challenges us to think critically and engage in meaningful discussions. So I want to hear from you. What do you think about D-Day? Was it the right decision? Did it change everything? Or was it just a piece of a larger puzzle? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's get the conversation started, because history is alive and it's shaped by the stories we tell and the questions we ask. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into history's most fascinating moments.